So friends, I have two short readings to share with you this morning ahead of my message. And the first is from the house at Pooh Corner. "Where are we going?" asked Pooh, hurrying after Christopher Robin. "Nowhere," said Christopher Robin. So they began going there. And after they had walked a little way, Christopher Robin said, "Pooh, what do you like doing best in the world?" "Well," said Pooh, "what I like best." And then he had to stop and think, because although eating honey was a very good thing to do, there was a moment just before you began to eat it, which was better than when you were. But Pooh didn't know what that moment was called. And our second reading, just a brief quote from the minister and author Frederick Buechner. "The extraordinary thing that is about to happen is matched only by the extraordinary moment just before it happens. Advent is the name of that moment." When I was a little boy growing up, every year, the Ladies' Flower Committee of Somerville Presbyterian Church decorated our church for Christmas. And as far as I was concerned, it couldn't happen soon enough. You see, we attended a Presbyterian church that for 11 months out of the year looked like it had been decorated by John Calvin himself. The walls of the tidy sanctuary were plain white with brown trim, their only adornment a small cross that hung up front. Even the stained glass windows failed to add color. Made from a bluish white glass, they looked as though they'd been smeared with non-fat milk. And they were opaque, lest we try to peek outside while the preacher was talking. The only touches of color in the room were the maroon carpet and the blue covers of the pew Bibles. Outside, the winter landscape of upstate New York wasn't much better. The trees were bare, the winds blew harsh off Lake Ontario, carrying snow squalls with them, and our lawns, if not blanketed in several feet of snow, were brown and wilted. Given this barren scene, it's no wonder that as a small child, I'd get excited for the Ladies' Flower Committee to bring a little color to my winter. And round about mid-November, I'd get up for church every Sunday morning, certain that this would be the week that the sanctuary would be decorated for Christmas. After all, the stores had their decorations up already. Why didn't we? In the car on our way to church, my mother and I would take bets on whether or not the ladies had worked their Christmas miracle yet. But we were always premature and would spend several weeks sitting in our pew daydreaming about the Christmas decorations. Then finally it would happen. One Sunday we'd come to church and enter a sanctuary awash in green and red. Dozens of poinsettias adorned the chancel. Tasteful pine wreaths with red ribbons hung from the walls, lending a seasonal fragrance to the room. And at the end of each pew along the center aisle, the ladies had affixed a tall wrought iron candle holder with a white candle. These were my favorite, the candles that on Christmas Eve provided the light while we sang Silent Night. Now, for years, I went through this dance of expectation, in part because I thought the decorations could go up just at any time. I just figured the committee women called each other up when they had some free time and they went and decorated the church. It was only later that I realized the decorations went up like clockwork every year at the same time, the first Sunday of a season called Advent. And ever since then, I've had a name for my favorite time of year. Advent is, of course, the 4-week season before Christmas, when Christians prepare to welcome God's coming to earth in the form of a small child. For Christians, Advent is a season of great expectations. For others, I suspect Advent may mean nothing more than a fancy word for 30 shopping days left till Christmas. But I wonder if somewhere between an exclusively Christian Advent on one hand and a commercialized, watered down holiday season on the other, I wonder if there isn't a lesson in Advent for us all. I believe Advent has something to teach us about hope and possibility, about how hope isn't just a happy feeling, how it's really more of a spiritual discipline, something that we actively have to cultivate in our lives. Advent teaches us that hope is a discipline of great expectations and careful preparations. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about that this morning. I'll tell you, I once received an object lesson in Advent in a very unlikely place. Not long ago, I was walking along the beach, trying to take a little time for reflection and meditation. I like to do that by the sea, and I'll bet many of you do too. But as I walked this day, I found that my attention kept being drawn to a surfer who was about 50 yards out from the shore. Now, it was a calm day, and I noticed that the surfer spent most of his time just bobbing up and down on his board, letting the small waves pass by. But I also noticed that he was always scanning the horizon, because every once in a while, a big one came along. And if the surfer paid close attention, he could see it coming from far away. He could see the ocean swell. He could see how the waves seemed to gain momentum as it grew. The surfer paddled furiously to sync up with the wave, and at just the right moment, he had to jump, right? He had to leave the security of the board and leap to his feet. And if he did, he was in for one heck of a ride. If he didn't, well, the wave just passed him by. And at that moment, I thought to myself, hey, I think there's a sermon in this. I think there's a lesson here, an Advent lesson in how we cultivate hope and possibility in our lives. Because I think we've all had moments when we've felt possibility and hope grow in our lives like the swelling of the sea, right? Like the expectant Mary, great with child. And what the surfer reminded me, at least, is that we are not mere passive recipients of such moments of possibility. We have a role to play in bringing them to fruition. We can be on the lookout for these moments, scanning the horizon of our lives for possibility and potential, feeling the ebb and flow of energy. And when the time feels right, then we've got to take a leap of faith, right? And not let that Advent moment pass us by. I'm guessing we can all probably look back on times in our lives when we took that leap of faith, when we rode that wave. Perhaps we can also recall moments when it felt like we let the big one pass us by. What Advent invites us to consider is this: what possibilities are emerging in our lives and in our world right now? And how can we help bring those possibilities to fruition? Frederick Buechner wrote, "The extraordinary thing that is about to happen is matched only by the extraordinary moment just before it happens." Advent is the name of that moment. How can we be active participants in those Advent moments? I've got to tell you though, folks, in order for any of this to be possible, we must still believe that extraordinary things can happen in the world. And sometimes I take the temperature of folks in the congregation or folks, friends of mine that I know, and I sometimes wonder if we dare anymore to have great expectations. It seems like we're living through a time when we're constantly having to lower our expectations, doesn't it? Lower our expectations for justice, lower our expectations for the health and well-being of our planet and our communities, lower our expectations for what we can accomplish together as a people. Rather than cultivating great expectations, I feel like we're always bracing ourselves for even more bad news. But you know what, friends? We can't give up on our great expectations. We must risk looking the fool and dare to believe still. You know, ultimately, Advent is a way of looking at the world, a way of believing in possibilities. It's a belief that we can make a way out of no way. When I was at All Souls, I worked for many years with the Reverend William Barber, the leader of the Moral Monday movement in North Carolina and the New Poor People's Campaign. I don't know, I'm sure some of you have listened to Reverend Barber or heard him preach before. Reverend Barber always taught us that the first step in our liberation as a people is our cognitive liberation. And cognitive liberation, he said, is when people believe not only that change should happen, because we all believe that, but also that it can happen. And what's more, that we have the power to make it happen. Because if we don't believe that, then change definitely won't happen. You know, I'm thinking back to the civil rights movement. And I know I don't need to tell you this history because many of you lived through that moment. But back then, folks marched on Selma and Birmingham and Washington, and they sang a song, right? They sang, "We shall overcome." We shall overcome. They didn't sing, "Well, maybe we'll overcome." They didn't sing, "Well, geez, the odds are stacked against us." No, they sang, "We shall overcome." They sang, "Deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday." And friends, that is the cry of an Advent people. That's the cry of a people who refuse to give up on their great expectations. Imagine what it would look like if we all decided that we weren't going to let go of our great expectations for our lives, our families, our communities, our world. That's what the season of Advent invites us to consider. Now, friends, in closing, I want to just bring this message a little closer to home and talk about this congregation, the UU Society of Martha's Vineyard. Because I believe that we have entered our own Advent season, a moment that's pregnant with possibility for UUSMV. You know, next Sunday, for the first time in almost 2 years, we will, God willing, return to worship in our chapel. By next spring, when the chapel is outfitted with new AV equipment, we will return to regular Sunday worship in person and online. This hybrid worship will allow us to once again welcome one another and to welcome visitors into the warmth of a real, live, in the flesh community, while also allowing us to stay connected with beloved members who left the island or who are homebound. At the same time, you will be in search for a new settled minister, someone who will be able to live with you here on island and serve you for many years to come. Friends, this is an Advent time for this community, a time of possibility. And as I think about that, I find myself going all the way back to the Ladies' Flower Committee of Somerville Presbyterian Church. Because those women knew, as I know you do, that Advent isn't just about great expectations. It's also about careful preparations. I'm thinking about all the time and care and attention those women lavished on readying our sanctuary for Christmas, and how it was that careful preparation that allowed the great expectations of at least one little boy to come to fruition. So even as this is a time of great expectation for our church, we also need to make careful preparation. We can help bring this Advent moment to fruition by reaching out to current members and friends, maybe those who've slipped away during COVID, and invite them to join us as we return to in-person worship. We can prepare by getting ready to welcome new folks who might join us when we open our doors again. You can prepare by scanning the horizon out there and looking for and finding the best minister out there to lead you into the future. And when you find that person, to take a leap of faith and do all that you can to bring them to the island to serve as your next minister. It's an Advent time for this congregation, a time pregnant with all the possibilities that the future holds for you and for your ministry on the island. The extraordinary thing that is about to happen is matched only by the extraordinary moment just before it happens. Advent is the name of that moment. And my friends, that moment is now. So let's seize it. Amen. Friends, I want to invite us into a brief time of silent meditation and communion as we reflect on this message and its meaning in our own lives and the lives of our community. Let's take a time now for silence. Amen. And now, with an Advent faith in the possibilities before us and our church and our world, I invite us to sing our closing hymn, I Know This Rose Will Open. And Andy, if you'll please clip the lyrics into the chat before the video. This is a simple chant, and so even if you don't see those words in the chat, you'll pick it up along the way and just sing along as you're able. Friends, whatever the image of that opened rose means for you in your life, well, I pray that it will open. That it'll open for you and be a blessing in your life. Friends, go in peace and in love. Amen. Oh, I'm really wishing we could come back to that children's choir and just let them sing for us one last time. But if we can't get the video up, we'll just let that go for this time. I promise to program that one again.
And we can also have Ann send that link out, Rob, in the Friday email, because it really is worthless. It really is delightful. So
it's a beautiful one.
Watch for that coming. Or
you know, I could try to rejoin because I think that the meeting won't end because you're co-hosted, Celeste. I can give it a shot.
I don't know. When we did that before, if the meeting ends, everybody come back.
That's okay, Andy. Why don't you stay on and we'll just thank you.
Yeah.
So friends, I offered some images this service of the cresting wave, of the opening rose, of Advent possibility. And I just wonder how you find that message striking you in your own life or in the life of this congregation or in the life of our world right now. Just open up this space for folks to share.
This isn't probably on topic as much as, but you remind me that we need to decorate the chapel, and Jennifer Parkinson heads that up each year or has, and I'm wondering if she needs help and if there's a time when we might get together to decorate the chapel.
I think Lucinda has something to say about that.
Yes, today's the day that I'm doing outside the chapel. I've got all the supplies finally. The weather has cooperated, and I'll probably be over the chapel somewhere around maybe, let's say, 1:30. I've got the door to do. I've got to decorate some wreaths. I've got the door to do. I've got the window boxes to do. And as I say, all the supplies are there except the wreaths. So anybody wants to join me and help me decorate the outdoors. Jennifer has been she's the one that does a beautiful job inside, but I just want to get the outside fixed up too. So
and there'll be some poinsettias too, right, Lucinda?
I've ordered those, so I haven't heard yet if they've come in, but I'll check on that. But yeah, they've.
And what's the time?
Yeah, around 1:30. I thought I'd be over there
Today?
Uh-huh. It's a nice day to be able to do this. Wind's not blowing, and
See,
The soil's not frozen in the pots, hopefully.
So as we speak, Jennifer and Michael Savoy are at the church now.
all
Decorating.
right. All right. Well, I guess I'll be joining them outside.
Our church, we're blessed to have a congregation filled with people who know how to make careful preparations. Yeah. So thank you all for that.
Rob, I think, Rob, that you need to say a prayer for good weather on Sunday,
Yeah.
Sunday too. Because right
I'll
now
do that.
it says it's going to be raining on the s'mores.
Okay. I've never seen a marshmallow in the rain. It probably doesn't look pretty.
They probably taste the same though, you know?
Can I just say something kind of back to the sermon?
Sure.
When you mentioned the 60s and singing We Shall Overcome, I always love that song, and I always love that the 60s, as I look back on it, it's so nostalgic because I really, really believed it. And I remember every time I would stand in a circle of people singing and holding hands and tears would come down my face. And I'm sad to say, I've lost that. I don't believe it anymore. And I need help with that. You know, I loved your sermon, I think, but it's just hard now.
Thanks for being honest, Karen. I think that's you. I think you're not alone. Thank you. Mimi.
I was thinking along the same lines of how nowadays, just when we are optimistic about getting back to a normal life, Omicron shows up and we're back into that moment of who knows what's going to happen. And I was thinking of the civil rights where they had setback after setback after setback, but they kept going. They really did keep the faith and know that they were going to have success. And although we've got a long way to go, I would hope that most of us who live through that can point to some things that have been positive in society as a result of civil rights. So it's just have to look for those people, those groups who really had a very deep faith and just hang on to them for dear life.
And I have to say that maybe this doesn't apply so much to civil rights, but in terms of the congregational life at USMB, to enjoy the journey, that a lot of times I was like a result-oriented person and I wanted to just get to that end result. But there's a lot of joy in the preparation, as you said, but also in the journey. And we have an expression in our family, if it's not okay, it's not the end. You know, I'll be okay in the end. So, you know, a lot of times we'll say, well, if it's not okay, it's okay. It'll all be okay in the end, but let's enjoy this journey and live the moment and take the good with the bad.
And since we read Pooh this morning, Pooh had a remark somewhere along in his writing about it's okay to not be okay. And if you feel not okay at a moment, just wait, you know. I think the moment of anticipation for something to happen sometimes is greater joy than the actual happening. I can't give a particular example of that, but I appreciate the fact that this Advent time is a time of looking forward and maybe just enjoy the looking forward. And then because for Christmas for me, after all the years being a Unitarian, has become such an overwhelming commercial event. The whole month, well, you know, starts before Thanksgiving, starts as soon as Halloween is over, this Christmas stuff is out. And that takes away from anything that I want to enjoy about it. It's just way too much commercialism. But I do love the church when it has candles in it and poinsettias and that feeling of that connects me with childhood anyway.
Barb, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hear you?
I'd like to make a comment on that as well. I think that it's a wonderful time of Advent. I love the analogy of the rose opening. If you look at a rose bush, all of the roses don't open at the same time. We've been a nation that seems to be at odds with itself, but I think it's a period where there's going to be a big awakening, and that rose will certainly open. That it is a time of Advent, and that we all have to remain optimistic and hope and help that to happen. Thanks.
I want to piggyback on Jim's, if I may. Many of you have heard the little story about the lessons of the geese. And when one of the geese is, there's always one in the forefront in the V. And when that goose gets tired, it can move to the back and a new goose goes to the front and leads. And so it's okay to lose hope here and there. And then others of us need to hold that hope, and we need to keep that circle going, so that we can be there for one another.
Thanks, Rita.
I just
Yeah.
finished reading Jane Goodall's book on hope, and she has it's a very rather quick read. She believes so deeply in the youth of the world, and in our resilience. She has the point where she says resilience and the indomitable, if I pronounce that word correctly, of the humanity to move forward. And she's been traveling the world, speaking about climate change and how there is hope, and she has great hope no matter what she sees. It was a very uplifting book after all the books I've read that are kind of downer when you think of all the things that we have not done well. And so the Advent to me gives a chance to renew that spirit of we can do it. You know, it might be slow. My hope is that we can save the planet, just save the planet for us to have our children and our animals and each other to live in. But it's sometimes kind of slow. We can keep doing it though.
Emily, I see you've got your hand up.
Thank you. I didn't want to be distracting with my camera on because I'm in such a strange spot, but it's beautiful to be outside. You know, I've been feeling a lot of gratitude because I'm celebrating Hanukkah right now. And I just feel like this past year with Stevie's health, I witnessed an actual miracle. You know, he had his bone marrow transplant and it went down from there, but then it went back up. And now it's like he almost never had it. It's so good. I mean, that's not exactly true, but for a lot of people who hadn't seen him and didn't know about it over the course of the pandemic, they wouldn't know, you know, because he's doing that well. And I think about COVID and how desperate, but now the vaccine has saved so many people. So I feel like I look for proof of miracles, and I look to see how much has changed in all the ways that we're talking about, whether it be awareness about, you know, the environmental consciousness that's come up and racial issues being better than they were, even though they're not good enough by any standards and all those things. But I really do struggle in my heart, like in a deep way, with like the faith of the things in my life that are still yet to bloom. And, you know, even though I witnessed Stevie come back from a very scary moment, you know, some of our very dear friends are not. And, you know, it's a very hard thing to balance, you know, the mass shootings and all the things when it's like there's one step forward and 3 steps back, I feel like across the board in the world. And I really want to use those miracles that I've been so lucky to have as proof to myself, you know, like to get on board 100% in my heart. But there's a part of me that's still scared or cynical or just whatever it is. And I'm curious, you know, I was very eager for this sermon, no pun intended, but, you know, to think about how can we prepare for miracles? How can we create them and seize them, you know, on purpose? Because they are available and they are happening, and there is so much good that's evolving, and it's not a perfect wave, that's for sure. But I'm hoping that I can deepen my connection to that optimism. I like what you said, Ruda, about other people holding that for us when we're not feeling it.
That's right. Yeah. Thank you, Emily.
Pardon me for speaking up. May I make a comment on the telephone?
Hi, Steffi. Yes.
Hi. Well, I think there's a miracle sort of staring us in the face, and no one has mentioned it, and I feel like I owe myself a duty to mention it. There's a free house on Curtis Lane in Edgartown. Has anyone read the article?
Yes.
Well, how come nobody mentions that? I'm mentioning it. I think it would be a great opportunity. I'd be willing to help. Anyway, there you have it. It's worth inspecting or at least thinking about.
Thanks, Steffi.
You're welcome.
Let's see, who is there? It looks like Peter, you got your hand up.
Am I being heard?
Yes.
Yep.
I'm not much for miracles. But I'm also thinking that sometimes in this forum, we have a lot of people crying the blues and ignoring some of the wonderful things that are happening. And in particular, I'm thinking of the verdict down in Georgia, where the 3 men were convicted of murder of a Black man who happened to be running in their neighborhood. And as Al Sharpton spoke after the verdict, this was unheard of in the South, that 11 white people on a jury would convict 3 white men of murdering a Black person. This is, it's one little verdict in a sea of verdicts that are unfair, but it was prominent. It was clear to the people who saw it. It happened in the state of Georgia, where there's already an upswell of things that seem like justice. So it's easy to be pessimistic, with our former president down in Mar-a-Lago still piping up. But it's important also to look on the bright side and try to look on the bright side all we can. And if that's what Advent is, maybe we just got to have Advent all the time.
Thanks, Peter. I mean, I think we see how one of the disciplines of hope is always having to be always being on the lookout for it, right? Because sometimes we do get overwhelmed by the difficult news out there, and so we've got to be scanning that horizon for evidence. Nancy Wood, you had your hand up earlier.
Well, I was just going to say something about what's happened in our family. About 2 years ago, I lost one of my daughters with a brain tumor, and she had 3 boys. And the youngest boy, Stephen, has had an awful time with it. He dropped out of college, and he's just been, I don't know, he wasn't himself, I'll say, for a long time. And suddenly, he's taken up surfing. And that's kind of changed his life. He's got something to look forward to every day. And I don't care if he goes back to college or not for a long time. Let him surf and be happy, because it's just changed his whole attitude. And it was like out of the blue, like you said in your sermon, you don't know when these things are going to happen. But suddenly, I guess he just decided he wanted to try that. And he doesn't stop. And I'm getting all these pictures of the waves and of him looking happy. So I wanted to celebrate that.
That must do your heart good to see your grandson happy.
Oh, yes, you have no idea.
Yeah. Judy Crawford. Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you. Oops. Yeah, thank you, Rob. I do believe in miracles. I tend to call them windfalls as a sailor. But one of the miracles that I think this congregation experienced recently was when Betsy Gibson gave us a beautiful Mason and Hamlin piano for our chapel. And it was out of the blue. I mean, it was after a couple of years of raising money and hoping to find the right piano and looking at things. And I am in great anticipation of hearing that played this coming Sunday by Jeremy. And I'm going over to the chapel to kind of polish it up and spiff it up so it's all ready for everybody to see. But I hope that everybody who comes will enjoy that anticipation of hearing the sound of this beautiful, beautiful piano. And I think when you do, you'll feel that the anticipation was every bit as exciting as the hearing of it.
Thanks, Judy. Is there anyone else who'd like to share before we leave one another? I want to let you all know that I'm arriving on island on Friday, and we'll be there for 10 days starting Friday. And I'm already scheduled to meet with many of you. If there's anyone who would like to schedule an appointment with me while I'm on island, please just reach out and email me, and we'll schedule a time, okay? And if there's nothing else, then thank you all for joining us for worship today. Thanks for your honesty and sharing. Bye-bye.
All right, take care, everybody.
See you for candlelight service.